Hello, my name is Gina Yeski. I'm the Resource Director for the Metro Highlands region of the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference. And today we're going to begin a 3-week class for the Leadership Academy, focusing on leadership in small groups. When asked what was missing most in our lives since the pandemic, there has been a universal answer. No matter where you live, if you live in rural areas or urban, if you're a small church or a larger community, if you're in the north or the south or the central area, it has been the same answer: connections. People have truly come to recognize how their local church was provided opportunities for regular, worthwhile connections that they never recognized in the past. However, while the current circumstances have made us more aware of this need is not new. Sunday morning worship and general congregational activities play an essential role in Christian formation. However, on their own, they are not adequate substitutes for the relationship formed in small group gatherings. This is why an integrated network of small groups is essential to the church's mission of making disciples for Jesus Christ, for the transformation of the world. Small groups are essentially the cornerstones to building relationships with God, each other, and our communities. Over the next 3 sessions, we are going to consider how to create the best environments for our small groups to be formed and flourish, as well as how to call and equip and send forth persons in your congregation to lead them. So I thank you for attending this Small Group Leadership Academy. And so let's look at what we're going to focus on in today's lesson. We're going to look at small group foundations, small group ministry needs a plan, and how to name a small group vision. And if we have enough time today, we'll do role of pastors and small group directors, but possibly we'll wait for that to session 2. So I'd like to ask you a question. I want you to share about a small group that has impacted your faith journey. Think about that for a minute. What is a small group in that you have been in? Maybe it's a Bible study, disciple Bible study. Maybe it's accountability group. Maybe it's a book club or the choir. But how has that group impacted your faith journey? And what was the most important aspect of that group? So was it the conversation? Was it the fact that you could commit to each other? What was the most important thing to you about that group? So let's pause for a minute so you can think about that answer. For the why and the how of small group ministry, what we want to begin with and think about is, what was Jesus's promise? For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there with you. Matthew 18:20. At the center of small groups is a relationship with God. Small groups are a means for which we can grow in our love and our service to God. But small groups are also about moving beyond this personal relationship that God desires with each of us and being called into meaningful relationships with each other. The Christian church has long practiced small group relationship building. And so we're going to take a look at the theological background of small groups. Small groups started with Jesus, they continued in the early church, and then John Wesley captured a model for small groups that we still use today. It is in the relationship building in small groups that we can be in meaningful conversation, and it offers us a place to bare our souls. I don't know about you, but I have kind of always envied reading Acts 2 and reading how they met together regularly and they share and they ate together and they did life together. They lived out small groups. We can see the value of small groups in the ministry of Jesus here on earth. Jesus created and led small groups. While we see stories of Jesus interacting with individuals and the crowds, but the main way that Jesus was in relationship with others was through small groups. He gathered the 12, he called them, and he continually invited them into spaces for interaction. Jesus modeled for us that teaching and ritual was not enough to sustain our faith journey. Instead, we need to connect regularly to share and explore our faith. John Wesley found his heart changing in a small group moment. Wesley believed that small groups were a means of grace. It was a way that God offered God's love and grace to each of us. He so believed in small groups and that they were so essential that he created a system for believers to come together and grow their faith and support one another and serve. Wesley, his pastoral experience told him that when Christians meet together in small groups for prayer and study and fellowship and service, that they would form a relationship of love and trust. And out of that relationship would be born deeper relationships with God. Today, we still hold on to the belief that faith is best nurtured in a small group setting. Small groups begin the process of transformation in the lives of the people in the group. Each of us, as members of our congregation, are on a faith journey. And with these experiences, each of us has been uniquely touched by God's grace through the power of the Holy Spirit. But where and how do we share what God is doing in our life? And how do we use our gifts? And that is born out of small groups. Now, small groups are like fashion. There are seasons of which there are most popular models. There are plenty of books that come out every year that say that if you just create small groups or organize small groups in your church in this way, you will be successful. Well, reading through all of them, there is one thing that I have learned about some successful small groups in churches that seems universal across all the different models. And that is that small group ministry is to be laity led and pastor supported. As much as I myself is a pastor, and I know so many other pastors, we love to teach and connect with our people. But when our small groups are dependent upon pastoral leadership, we are limiting their capacity to multiply. So while as pastors have an important role in small group ministry, the leadership of small groups needs to come from the congregation. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to pause, and I'm going to have a question. I'm going to invite both the pastors and the laity to answer in small groups of their own. So for pastors, the question is, from your perspective as a pastor, Why do we have small group ministry? And how will you as a pastor know the small group ministry is successful in your eyes? And for the congregation, small group leaders, small group attendees, I'm going to ask you, from your perspective, why do you and your church have small group ministry? And do you see yourself as a small group leader or member? We're going to pause for a moment and invite you to take time to answer these questions and then come together, pastors and lay people, and discuss your answers. So, the why of small group ministry in your local location, and then what makes it successful, and how do you see yourself taking part in it? Let's pause. Well, I hope that you've had a successful conversation. So, next, we're going to talk about developing a church-wide small group goal. We're going to talk about how creating a vision connects with the church-wide vision. Creating a vision for your small group needs to be done intentionally, and that creating a vision sets up the desired outcome. I recently read an analogy, and I think it's pretty fitting. It said small group models are a lot like diets. Everyone is looking for the magic diet that will help them lose weight without a plan. And you know what? Likely it just won't happen. You know, we all want to start something and then be healthy for the rest of our lives. However, almost any diet will work in a short term, but it seldom brings long-term results unless we've really invested in life-changing applications. Well, just like a diet, small group ministry requires intentionality. A church without an intentional small group ministry plan is likely the same thing going to happen as trying to lose weight without a long-term plan. You know, in the beginning, you might have a little bit success, but it just isn't going to last. When people grow in their small groups ministry, they will more likely stick to the church. They will give more, they will invite more, and they will be more involved in ministry. So it is very important for you to invest the time necessary to create a vision for small groups that can lead to lifelong transformation for your church and for its members. Vision is a mental image of the final outcome, a preferred future of what you want to see and what you believe can be a reality in your church. As the church, we all have a mission. We have been commissioned by Jesus himself to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And from that, we have a local church vision. And this is how we can live out our mission in our unique setting. And then a small group needs to have a vision that connects to the mission of the church as well as our mission as Christians. So, if the vision of the church is, I'm going to share an example with you. The vision of the church is we are on a mission to meet people where they are to share the love and the transforming message of the gospel in our communities, our region, and our world. So we know the mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ. The vision is set forth here. Then the next step could be that you could have a small group vision that would connect into the church's vision. So the small group vision would be to create a place for people to connect and invite their friends to share life of faith together. A vision is an important tool. We needed to recruit our team members for coaching and for the church leaders to know. Too many times church leaders ask people to join something because there is a need. But people who step out, they really want to know, what is the why behind this? Why do you believe in this? And then I can believe in it. Every small group ministry needs to have a clear vision statement that can be communicated to the invitees. Without a vision, it is difficult to choose a strategy that will result in a good outcome. So, if you don't set a vision, and what you want for your small groups is to be a place of outreach, and your leaders don't understand that, they might have a completely different idea and create small groups that, instead of the goal being to reach new people, they're going to do it for accountability, which is a closed group where new people are not invited in. And so setting a vision is important so the people understand the why of your small group. If you have a sermon space small group, but you want to join people from your community, that isn't practical, because people who are not attending your church will likely not have heard your sermon. When you've created a vision for your small groups, people can follow along. So if I took my goal for small groups to offer a space for people to take time to do life together and invite others to join them, that is something I could convey to my leaders. I could say, you need to give space and time for the Holy Spirit. So while we all like to come in and finish our lesson for the week, that might not work every week. If the Holy Spirit is moving the group to pray for an entire lesson, well, that's okay. The accomplishment is to give space for the Holy Spirit. That will be allowing there to sometimes be change. And small groups that meet people where they are means that there's no pre-expectation. So you don't have to come to church to be a part of our small groups. People who take time to do life together, there'll be a place for building friendships, and congregational care will be taken and practiced in these small groups. Space and time given for the Holy Spirit gives people a place to consider how to live out their life as a disciple, to take up the challenge that is offered in the weekly preaching, to have a time for being centered in prayer, and for the members to discover and explore their gifts. And to meet people where they are means that it's a place to invite those outside of their faith circle. So this is a place where you can invite people from your job or from your neighborhood to come in and see the work of the church. It's a place where people can open up and listen and grow. So you would take your small group vision and take the bullet points and then break down the opportunities for your small group leaders. Small groups have models, and often these models can connect with your vision. So I'm going to just share with you a few models for small groups. The first is a model of accountability and discipleship. Covenant groups. This follows John Wesley's model for growing disciples in your church. This is a class meeting. Meeting was Wesley's term for the basic small group of the Methodist movement. The main focus of the time together was that each person answered the question, "How is it with your soul?" Within these groups, the group members would experience the fullness of Christian community. They would offer each other grace and forgiveness and accountability and love and challenge and spiritual practices. And so the goal was accountability and discipleship, and the model was a covenant group. The next one I'd like to talk about is the goal is evangelism or edification. So the purpose of these small groups, are often called cell groups, is to build up the church and emphasize relational evangelism, serving the needs of unbelievers in practical ways. The church shares with the small group members that it is most important to find a need and fill it. This model was championed by the Korean church in the 1960s, and it's foundational model for all of the ministry in a church in Korea led by Reverend Cho. Cho did take the church culture that was not familiar with small groups at that time and was persistent in engaging the entire congregation in small groups by getting the entire congregation to come together in small groups. They continue to grow and grow beyond the size of the building itself. The next goal is leadership development and multiplication. So the purpose of this model is for each member in the church to see their leadership possibility. The premise is that each person has a gift to lead. And in addition to each person has a circle of their own influence. In the popular G12 model, each person is called to be a leader of a small group. The church instills in each person that you have gifts and you have leadership possibility. And there is an expectation that you will start your own small group after being a part of a small group for a short while. What each member is to do is, with one or two other members, gather people from your sphere of influence, especially those who are not church members, and then begin a small group and continue to guide this group together in their life of discipleship. Each person is encouraged to see themselves as a leader and that they are to equip the members of their small group for leadership as a priority. This means that there would never be a shortage of leaders for small groups, and that because we all have our own groups that we have influence with, we will continually be sharing the message of Jesus Christ throughout our communities, our neighborhoods, our families. The next is relational small groups. The purpose of this model is for people to be in relationship with one another, for them to gather together and do life together. Often these groups come together around an interest. That's what brings the group together. But then once relationships are built and their time together, it leads to them doing ministry together. This model encourages members to leverage their gifts and their abilities and their interests and influence to create a community to make disciples. So now that we've heard the different small group visions, I'm going to ask you, what is your church's vision? Likely you already have a vision statement, so take a moment and write that down. And now, how can your small group vision connect to that vision? So I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment to write down, what is your church's vision? Okay, now that you have your church vision written out, how do you connect that vision to the small group vision? Well, we begin with, what is the vision of your small groups in your church? So, what will you hope happens in these groups? It begins with something as simple as, what is your definition of a group in your context? What makes a small group a small group? There are all kinds of small groups that in churches. There are traditional Bible studies. There are Sunday schools. There are youth groups. There are accountability groups. There are relationship building groups. There are craft groups. There's men's gatherings, women's gatherings, youth gatherings, children's gatherings. So what do you name that happens in your church that you are going to define as a small group? And then once you know that, what is the frequency of meetings? So is it enough for a small group in your church to meet once a month, like a women's ministry? Is it enough for a small group to meet 6 times during Advent or Lent? What is the group size? Some churches require that groups, once they become the size of 12, that they need to break up into smaller groups. Others are willing to have small groups grow as large as they naturally do. Are you a small church that allows small groups to be as small as 2 or 3 persons meeting together regularly for accountability and prayer? What is the mission that you want lived out in your small groups? What's going to be the purpose and the result? The next important question is, how will you make disciples in your small group? Remember, our church's mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ. So how will your small group make disciples, followers of Jesus Christ? Begin with naming for your congregation how you define a disciple in your context. And then the next thing is, what makes a good leader in your context? Do you require certain things from your leaders, being a member for so long, having taken so many classes before this? Do you have a covenant with your leaders to make sure that the confidentiality is kept, that people feel like they can trust that they can join any small group in your church and there is the same level of accountability for each and every small group leader? Next is, outline a general structure of the meeting. And when we talk about group leaders and their responsibilities, we're going to talk deeply about the outline of a meeting. But every leader should be given a guide to use for the outline of a meeting. Not that we need to be Phariseistic and it can't ever stray from that, but having a guide means that people's time will be used well. And lastly, what are your metrics for success? How will you know that your small groups are making disciples for Jesus Christ? How can you measure the fact that they are doing well? Some churches measure success by people continually want to go to that small group. Others want to measure success by what is the fruit that is coming out of these small groups. So are leaders coming out of the small group? Is this small group actually offering care for its members? Are they doing mission together? So what is your metrics for success in your congregation? G&J sets a goal for small groups, and we wish that at least 60% of worshipers Regularly participate in a small group experience. But I implore you to set a goal that will capture the imagination of the church, that will lead to more people being a part of the small group, which will eventually help you meet that goal of 60% of your worshipers being a part of the group. Likely, if you stand up front on Sunday and say, it's our goal to get 60% of you in a small group so that we are vital, that is not going to have people joining your small groups. However, if they can see your local church's vision for small group ministry, then they will be committed. And that means that your small groups will last beyond a time or two. And instead, the congregation will be invested in the process because they see the fruit of small group ministries in their lives. Once a vision for small groups has been cast, now it's time to saturate your congregation with this message. This happens when small groups are not just another thing that you can do in the church, along with a long list of other things like joining the craft fair, being a part of the choir, serving in a mission outreach, but instead it is the thing that your church does. All the work of the church can flow through small groups. So that choir work and that mission work and that craft fair can all happen as the part of small group ministry. But it requires well planned out small groups. When you have a small group ministry that is well set up, I promise you that you will now have a source of volunteers for your mission and your work and the other things that happen in your congregation. Make sure the leader and the members of the small group can understand and can share that vision. If it is way too complicated, if it has too many words, no one will ever be able to live it out. For pastors, make sure small groups are included in the action steps of your sermon. And not just, now if you join a small group and put that part in this sermon, but instead say things like, this week in your small group, will you please pray for how our congregation can meet the needs of our community? This will empower the small groups to explore and engage in conversations that really matter to the life of your congregation. Small group ministry can end up being the filter for all of the ministry that takes place in your congregation if it has a well planned out and set vision. So, over the next week, I invite you to think deeply about small group ministry and the importance of creating a vision, casting a vision for your congregation, for the leaders, and for the members. And that vision, I believe, will help you blossom and grow. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to our next meeting together. Have a great week.